What's someone like you doing in this courthouse? You don't belong here. Leave before I put you in your place." Officer Marco Santiago's voice exploded with racist fury as he cornered a black woman who had simply tried to help a confused visitor find directions. His three corrupt buddies, Gabriel, Bradley, and Luis, circled her like wolves, their hatred palpable in the crowded courthouse hallway. "I have every constitutional right to be here, Officer Santiago," she responded with calm dignity that only enraged him more. "Constitutional rights?" Santiago laughed with pure venom. "People like you think you have the same rights as real Americans. Let me educate you about how things really work here." The racial slurs started flying. Santiago called her stupid and words too vile to repeat. When she pulled out her phone to document the abuse, Santiago completely lost control. "Put that phone away. You people always try to make everything about race." He lunged at her like a wild animal. She stepped back but found herself trapped against Gabriel. 4 officers now surrounded her as witnesses gathered, some filming the escalating confrontation. "You people think you can just waltz into our courthouse and cause problems whenever you feel like it. This is our house." Then came the sound that echoed through the courthouse like a gunshot. Santiago slapped her across the face with such brutal force that her phone went flying. "That's for being stupid," he screamed as she fell backward, her body hitting the courthouse steps with a sickening impact. What Santiago didn't know was that he had just made the most catastrophic mistake in law enforcement history. Because the woman bleeding on those courthouse steps wasn't just any victim of police brutality. Hit subscribe because when Santiago discovers who he really assaulted, his entire world was about to implode in the most spectacular way imaginable. Have you ever seen racist hatred destroy the person who carries it? Because Santiago was about to learn that some people you should never, ever cross. If you believe in justice, type justice in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. The story began 48 hours before this courtroom nuclear explosion with the incredible woman Santiago had just declared war on. Judge Mary Shaw was at her home office in a scene that would break anyone's heart in the most beautiful way. She was surrounded by family photos with her husband Jamie, who was also an attorney, and their teenage daughter Maya. But it was the walls that told the real story. They were covered with law school diplomas, community service awards, and civil rights honors that represented a journey so inspiring it would give you chills. At 42 years old, Mary Shaw had been a federal judge for 15 years, and she wasn't just any judge, she was the first black woman to hold that position in this entire district. But what was absolutely devastating about her story was that she had come from nothing. And the narrator means absolutely nothing. Her mother had spent her life on her hands and knees cleaning other people's houses while facing daily humiliation and racist comments from employers who treated her like she was invisible. Her father? He had abandoned the family when Mary was 7, unable to handle the pressure of trying to provide for his family in a society that saw him as less than human. Mary Shaw had worked 3 jobs while studying law. Cleaning offices at night, serving tables during lunch shifts, and tutoring rich white kids who looked down on her. 3 jobs, while memorizing constitutional law and civil rights statutes. The exhaustion, the determination, the absolute refusal to give up that took was unimaginable. But the discrimination had started early. In law school, professors would call on her only when discussing cases about slavery or civil rights, as if that was all her brilliant mind was capable of understanding. Study groups would mysteriously forget to invite her. Job interviews would end abruptly when she walked in and they saw her face didn't match the white-sounding name on her resume. Her phone rang, and it was the court clerk discussing their overwhelming docket for the week. What made Judge Shaw legendary in legal circles was her reputation. Defense attorneys respected her fairness like it was a religion. Prosecutors knew she was tougher than steel but never unfair, and in 15 years she had never had a single disciplinary action. 0. Everyone who stepped into her courtroom knew they would be treated with dignity, regardless of their race, background, or circumstances. Then came this moment between Mary and Maya that would shatter anyone's heart. Maya looked at her mother with teenage vulnerability and asked, "Mom, how do you deal with all the racism in your career? The kids at school say horrible things about you being a judge." Mary's response would stop your heart. "Honey, dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you carry inside yourself, and no one can take it away unless you let them. They tried to break me every single day, but I refused to break." That line told you everything about the warrior Santiago had just picked a fight with. Here's where fate set the trap that would destroy Santiago's entire existence. Judge Shaw had been receiving complaint after complaint about officer misconduct at the courthouse. But it wasn't just harassment, it was systematic racial terrorism. Black families were being separated and humiliated. Latino immigrants were being threatened with deportation for minor infractions. Elderly minorities were being treated like dangerous criminals. So she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to observe courthouse security herself. But instead of walking in as the powerful Judge Shaw, she transformed herself into an ordinary citizen. Jeans, casual sweater, worn sneakers. She grabbed a simple coffee and headed to the courthouse looking like any random person you'd pass without a second glance. Meanwhile, here was the monster who was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Officer Marco Santiago was 38 years old, had been terrorizing people for 12 years, and his personnel file was stuffed with excessive force complaints that somehow kept disappearing into thin air. But what made him truly dangerous was that he wasn't just a corrupt cop, he was a white supremacist with a badge. He had built himself a crew of equally twisted officers, Gabriel, Bradley, and Luis, who shared his hatred and would lie, cheat, and cover up anything Santiago did. They had a group chat where they shared racist memes and coordinated their attacks on minorities. They called themselves the Cleaners because they were cleaning up the courthouse. Santiago would brag to his crew about keeping these animals in their place and making sure certain people knew they weren't welcome. The language he used would make your skin crawl. He referred to black visitors as problems to be solved, and Latino families as invaders who needed to be taught respect. They weren't just strategizing about courthouse security. They were planning psychological warfare against anyone who didn't look like them. Judge Shaw arrived at the courthouse carrying her innocent coffee, completely unrecognizable because she always used the private judicial entrance. As far as courthouse security knew, she was just another visitor. She found the perfect observation spot, and what she witnessed made her blood boil with righteous fury. Santiago wasn't just being aggressive. He was conducting what could only be described as racial profiling on steroids. He was making black teenagers empty their pockets and submit to searches for no reason. He was demanding papers from anyone who looked Latino, regardless of whether they were citizens. He was using intimidation tactics that would make Jim Crow officers proud. He deliberately misdirected a black family trying to find the adoption office, sending them to the wrong floor repeatedly, just to watch them struggle. He forced an elderly black woman to wait in line 3 times because he claimed her documents looked suspicious. The psychological cruelty was breathtaking. If you want to see this trap spring with devastating precision, you need to smash that subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you speechless. But tell viewers, have you ever seen someone abuse their power right in front of you? Because Judge Shaw was about to make Santiago pay for every single moment of cruelty. Judge Shaw observed Santiago's reign of terror when she witnessed something that forced her to act. There was this elderly black man, probably someone's grandfather, just trying to find family court to support his grandson who had been falsely accused. Santiago was treating him like a dangerous criminal, not just condescending but actively hostile. He was making the man stand against the wall with his hands visible while he checked for weapons on a 75-year-old man using a walker. "Stay right there, old man. Don't move until I tell you to move. I don't like the way you're looking at me." Anyone's heart would break watching this humiliation. But then there was a confused Latino woman struggling to understand courthouse directions while fighting back tears. Her English wasn't perfect, and Santiago's crew was deliberately speaking faster and using complex legal terms to confuse her further. Judge Shaw stepped forward to help translate because she spoke fluent Spanish. It was a simple act of human kindness that was about to trigger an avalanche of consequences. Santiago noticed her interfering with his racial harassment campaign, and you could see his entire demeanor shift into predator mode. "Ma'am, you need to move along immediately. This is official police business, and you're interfering with a security operation," Santiago said, approaching her with that intimidating swagger designed to make people cower. Judge Shaw maintained perfect politeness while explaining she was simply helping with directions. But Santiago's paranoia and racism kicked into overdrive. He demanded her ID with the aggression of someone conducting a terrorist investigation. She handed over her driver's license. Notice she deliberately didn't reveal her judicial credentials. Santiago ran her name through the system, saw she lived in an upscale neighborhood, and that discovery ignited his racist fury even more. "What's someone like you doing in this courthouse? You don't belong here. You look like the kind of troublemaker who comes here to cause problems for hardworking Americans." You could see Judge Shaw maintaining her composure, beans, but her voice carried unmistakable steel. "I have every constitutional right to be here, Officer Santiago, and I have the right to help fellow citizens who need assistance." That confidence, that dignity, that refusal to be intimidated, it absolutely enraged Santiago. His mask slipped completely, and you could see Gabriel, Bradley, and Luis starting to circle like a wolf pack sensing vulnerable prey. "Constitutional rights?" Santiago laughed with pure venom. "People like you think you have the same rights as real Americans. Let me educate you about how things really work here." This was the moment everything exploded into chaos. Santiago ordered Judge Shaw to leave the courthouse immediately, but his language became explicitly racial. She refused because she knew her rights better than he knew his own badge number. "I said move along, lady. Your kind isn't welcome here when you're causing trouble. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Judge Shaw planted her feet like she was rooted to the earth. "Officer, I am not breaking any laws. I have legitimate business here, and I will not be intimidated." Santiago's racism erupted like a volcano. "Business? What possible business could someone like you have in this courthouse? You probably don't even belong in this country." The racial slurs started flying like poisonous arrows. Santiago called her uppity, used the N-word repeatedly, and accused her of being a welfare queen who was probably there to scam the system. Judge Shaw pulled out her phone to document this racist assault, and Santiago completely lost his mind. "Put that phone away right now. You people always try to make everything about race. This is about law and order." He lunged for her phone like a wild animal, but Judge Shaw stepped backward and bumped directly into Gabriel. Now she was surrounded by 4 officers, and you could feel the danger escalating into something deadly. Santiago's hatred poured out unchecked. "You people think you can just waltz into our courthouse and cause problems whenever you feel like it. This is our house, and we decide who belongs here." Gabriel joined in. "Maybe she needs to learn some respect for authority," Bradley added. "These people never learn until you teach them a lesson." Luis completed the circle. "She's probably here illegally anyway." Witnesses were gathering, phones were recording, and when Santiago realized his racist attack was being documented, he became exponentially more violent and desperate. The discrimination wasn't just individual, it was institutional, systematic, and designed to terrorize. The physical assault began with a sound that echoed through the courthouse like a gunshot. Santiago slapped Judge Shaw across the face with such brutal force that her phone went flying, shouting, "That's for being uppity," as his hand connected. She fell backward, her body hitting the unforgiving courthouse steps with a sickening impact. "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing, resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer, and disturbing the peace. Maybe a night in jail will teach you some respect." All 4 officers piled on top of an unconscious federal judge like she was a dangerous fugitive. There was actual blood pooling on the courthouse steps where her head had hit the concrete. Gabriel deliberately put his knee on her neck while handcuffing her. Bradley stepped on her hand, accidentally. Luis took photos with his personal phone, planning to share them in their racist group chat later. They were handcuffing the woman who held their entire futures in her hands, and they had absolutely no idea. If you think this story is absolutely insane, you need to hammer that subscribe button because Santiago had no clue he had just committed the most career-ending mistake in law enforcement history. Here's the question. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave so deep they would never climb out? Because Santiago had just buried himself alive. Judge Shaw regained consciousness in a filthy holding cell, her face grotesquely swollen, clothes torn and blood-stained, dried blood matted in her hair. She demanded her constitutionally guaranteed phone call, but the corrupt officers laughed in her face and told her she would get one when we decide you're ready. What's the rush, princess? Your welfare check isn't going anywhere, Santiago mocked through the bars. Meanwhile, Santiago and his crew of criminals were frantically fabricating a police report that flipped reality completely upside down. They were claiming Judge Shaw had been a violent, belligerent trespasser who had launched an unprovoked, racially motivated attack on Officer Santiago and had made terroristic threats against courthouse security while screaming anti-white slurs. Every single word was a calculated lie designed to destroy an innocent woman's life. All four officers, Santiago, Gabriel, Bradley, and Luis, signed sworn statements corroborating these malicious lies. They even got witnesses from their racist network to provide false testimony. The desk sergeant, who had been taking bribes for years, went along with their story because corruption had infected this department like a metastasizing cancer. When Judge Shaw finally received her phone call after 8 hours of illegal detention, she called her husband Jamie. The shock in his voice was heartbreaking as he processed that his wife, a respected federal judge, had been brutally assaulted and falsely arrested. He rushed to the courthouse with the best civil rights attorney money could buy. But when Jamie arrived, he witnessed something that chilled him to the bone. An IT officer who was clearly working with Santiago's crew was mysteriously deleting the security footage that would expose their lies. They were destroying evidence of their crimes right in front of him, and when he tried to intervene, Santiago threatened to arrest him too. Your wife got what she deserved, and you'll get the same if you don't watch yourself, Santiago warned with a sinister smile. The next morning's bail hearing was a nightmare designed to humiliate. Judge Shaw was forced to appear in a humiliating orange jumpsuit, her face still bearing the brutal evidence of Santiago's assault. A different judge was presiding who didn't recognize her because her face was so badly beaten and swollen. The prosecutor, who had been fed Santiago's lies, requested maximum bail, claiming Judge Shaw was a flight risk with a history of violence against law enforcement. The defense attorney was fighting an uphill battle against institutional racism. This was where Santiago made the most catastrophic mistake of his entire pathetic life. He took the witness stand in federal court and committed perjury with the confidence of someone who thought the system would always protect him. He described Judge Shaw as a dangerous criminal who had posed an immediate threat to courthouse safety, adding graphic details about her alleged anti-white hatred and terrorist sympathies. Every syllable was a lie. Every word was perjury. And he had absolutely no idea he was testifying against the very judge who would determine his fate. She was clearly radicalized, Your Honor. These people are getting more violent every day. We need to send a message that this behavior won't be tolerated in our courthouse. But then we were transported back to that explosive courtroom moment from the beginning. Judge Shaw revealed her true identity and donned her judicial robes, while Santiago's world imploded in real time. The courtroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. Santiago's face went from smug confidence to pure terror as he realized his career, his freedom, his entire life was over. His fellow officers immediately started backing away from him like he was carrying a deadly plague. The rats were abandoning the sinking ship faster than you could imagine. Judge Shaw took her rightful seat behind the bench with the authority of someone born to dispense justice. Officer Santiago, you have just committed multiple felonies by lying under oath in federal court while testifying about your brutal, racially motivated assault on a sitting federal judge. Then she delivered the knockout blow that destroyed any hope Santiago had of escape. Bailiff, bring up the courthouse security footage from the backup server that you didn't know existed. Santiago's face went white as a ghost. He had no idea a backup server even existed. The video began playing on every screen in the courtroom, showing Santiago's unprovoked, racist attack in devastating, undeniable detail. Every slur, every blow, every moment of humiliation was exposed for the world to see. The courtroom gasped as they heard Santiago's voice on the recording. That's for being uppity. The racism was undeniable, the brutality was shocking, and the lies were completely exposed. The defendant in this case, Judge Shaw said with the cold precision of a surgical blade, is me. I am the victim of your assault, your perjury, your civil rights violations, your conspiracy to destroy evidence, and your systematic campaign of racial terrorism. But Judge Shaw wasn't finished. She had more evidence that would destroy Santiago's entire network. Bailiff, please also display the contents of Officer Santiago's phone, which was seized under warrant this morning. The racist group chat messages appeared on screen. The planning of attacks on minorities, the celebration photos from previous assaults, the coordinated lies and cover-ups, the white supremacist memes and Nazi symbols. The entire courtroom was horrified by the depth of the conspiracy. Judge Shaw sentenced Santiago to 35 years in federal prison for assault on a judicial officer, civil rights violations, hate crimes, perjury, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violations of the RICO Act for running a criminal enterprise within the police department. Gabriel got 30 years for conspiracy and hate crimes. Bradley got 28 years for evidence destruction and civil rights violations. Luis got 25 years for conspiracy and perjury. But the justice didn't stop there. Judge Shaw launched a comprehensive federal investigation into the entire police department using her emergency judicial powers. She ordered an immediate review of every single case involving these corrupt officers and their associates. The results were absolutely staggering and heartbreaking. Over 800 cases were overturned due to evidence of racial bias and fabricated evidence. Hundreds of victims came forward with similar stories of abuse, racism, and police brutality spanning over a decade. The investigation revealed a systematic network of corruption involving 47 officers, 12 prosecutors, 3 judges, and multiple courthouse staff members. The FBI raids uncovered millions of dollars in stolen assets, drug trafficking operations run by police, and evidence of at least 15 wrongful deaths covered up by the department. 12 families whose loved ones had died in police custody finally got justice when the cover-ups were exposed. The city faced over $200 million in civil rights lawsuits. The entire police department was dissolved and rebuilt from scratch under federal oversight. Santiago's racist network extended beyond the courthouse. The investigation revealed connections to white supremacist groups, domestic terrorism plots, and human trafficking operations. The FBI arrested 23 additional conspirators in a massive sweep. 3 corrupt judges were impeached and removed from office. 7 prosecutors were disbarred and faced criminal charges. The mayor and police chief were forced to resign in disgrace. Judge Shaw didn't just reform the department, she transformed the entire criminal justice system in the district. She established new oversight committees with community representation, mandatory bias training for all law enforcement, and independent investigation units for police misconduct. The courthouse where Santiago had assaulted Judge Shaw became a symbol of justice and reform. The steps where her blood had been spilled were now the site of a civil rights memorial honoring all victims of police brutality. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Shaw established a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing law degrees, naming it after her mother who had cleaned houses to support her daughter's dreams. In the final scene that would bring tears to anyone's eyes, Judge Shaw was back in her office when Maya visited after school. Maya looked at her mother with admiration and asked, "Mom, how did you stay so calm and strong through all of that horror? How did you not let their hatred break you?" Judge Shaw's response embodied everything she represented. "Because I knew the truth would eventually come out, Maya. It always does when you refuse to let anyone break your dignity, no matter what they do to you. But more importantly, I knew that every person they hurt, every family they destroyed, every injustice they committed was counting on someone to fight back. I couldn't let them down." She pointed to a new photo on her wall. Hundreds of people whose cases had been overturned, whose loved ones had gotten justice, whose lives had been restored because one woman had refused to be silenced. This fight was never just about me, sweetheart. It was about everyone who couldn't fight back, everyone who was told their lives didn't matter, everyone who was made to feel less than human. Santiago thought he could destroy me, but he actually gave me the power to save hundreds of other people. The courthouse steps where Santiago's brutal assault had taken place now bore a memorial plaque that read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied," in memory of all victims of hate and in honor of those who refused to be silenced. But there was more. Santiago's case became a landmark federal precedent for prosecuting hate crimes committed by law enforcement. The Shaw Standard was now used nationwide to identify and prosecute racially motivated police misconduct. Judge Shaw's courage inspired a new generation of civil rights attorneys and activists. Law schools across the country studied her case as an example of how one person's refusal to accept injustice could transform an entire system. And Santiago? He was serving his 35-year sentence in a federal prison where his fellow inmates didn't take kindly to racist ex-cops. His appeals had all been denied, his assets had been seized to pay victim compensation, his pension had been revoked, his family had disowned him. He had nothing left except the knowledge that his hatred had destroyed not just his own life, but had exposed a network of corruption that had been terrorizing innocent people for years. If this story proved anything, it was that karma didn't just exist. It had perfect timing, devastating precision, and sometimes it wore judicial robes. The bigger they thought they were, the harder they fell, and Santiago had fallen from a height he had never known was possible. Hit the subscribe button for more incredible stories of justice served against impossible odds, because stories like this proved that no matter how powerful corruption seemed, truth and justice would always find a way to prevail.